Are you watching closely? Every Christopher Nolan film consists of 3 acts. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, like any other movie. They have all the requisite plot beats and screen time minutes one would expect from a typical Hollywood movie, without any significant deviation. Act 1, the introduction, the exposition, and the status quo. Act 2, the heavy and difficult middle act and midpoint of the movie. And Act 3, the resolution, climax, and denouement of the film. Much has been made of Nolan's legendary writing process, but if you look at the on-screen minutes, the script page numbers, and the overarching narrative, they are as formatted and necessarily formulaic as one would expect from any Hollywood film. Although he likes to play with the notion of time and chronology, his films are surprisingly standard in their narrative arcs. This makes sense, as if any of these elements that hold the story together are off, the audience will immediately be jarred and taken out of the movie. One notable caveat to all of this is that Nolan's films rarely play to a standard 120-minute runtime, but the plot points and various beats of the movies are all still very much in place. I may as well warn you at this point of heavy spoilers for Nolan's films. If you haven't seen the following movies, I suggest you do: Memento, Insomnia, the Dark Knight Trilogy, The Prestige, Inception, Interstellar, Tenet, and Oppenheimer. And with that said, onwards with the video. The opening image, setting up the first plot point in the movie, is crucially important, and Nolan's are always visually striking. The "are you watching closely" moment in The Prestige, the Polaroid murder in Memento, the beach scene in Inception. Some of these establishing shots encapsulate the movie for us before we even see it. They herald the protagonist's inescapable destiny, which may be salvation or downfall, or in many cases in Nolan's films, ambiguity. The setup is always really clear and the premise is reinforced 1 or 2 more times during the course of the movie's first and middle act, making sure the audience is on board by a certain point. In the first act, the status quo, the initial state of the protagonist's world before the inciting incident, is important in setup. If we take the example of Memento, the status quo, such as it is, when we are introduced to the character of Leonard Shelby, is actually a maddening chaos and aftermath of a serious crime. The timeline then seems to run backwards, and we are left eventually with the inevitable feeling that Leonard is going around in circles. This is interesting, as even as recently as Interstellar, he describes the physical and quantum world with regards to time and chronology as being a flat circle. This bird's eye view of the timeline when plotting and planning the screenplay is useful to Nolan when interweaving plotlines. He does, by his own admission, diagram and index card the work and works out the plot and narrative almost mathematically. This seems to be important in locking down the structure of the movie and then writing the movie from the start as the audience will eventually see it. In Batman Begins, Bruce Wayne's world and his status quo, such as it is that of an angry young man who wants to change the world. In The Dark Knight, Gotham's status quo has changed dramatically. It is still ravaged by crime, and newer, more ominous threats lurk on the horizon. In The Dark Knight Rises, much time has passed, and Bruce finds himself in a new type of turmoil, the onset of old age. He is quickly shaken out of that inertia, however, as past ghosts come back to haunt him and settle old scores. Around this time, when the inciting incident happens, in the first act, there is the call to adventure, the moment when the protagonist is presented with an opportunity or challenge that sets them on their journey. Once the setup has been established, after the inciting incident, the protagonist, or anti-hero as the case may be, is faced with a predicament where they must either change the world they live in or in some way undergo a change within themselves. This is overtly portrayed in Interstellar. The character of Cooper is forced by a number of extenuating circumstances into taking on an adventure that will take him away from his family, but ultimately saved humanity. Cooper, in so doing, pays a heavy price. In Inception, Cobb is forced to undertake an assignment that he is ill prepared for, but that will ultimately allow him to be reunited with what is left of his family, his 2 young children. In Nolan's Batman Trilogy, the character of Bruce Wayne is compelled in the first movie to become a vigilante, in order to spare the citizens of Gotham City the same fate and tragedy as he previously endured. Wayne therefore undergoes significant physical and mental transformation to become a hero for Gotham, but at great personal sacrifice to himself. Another interesting plot point as we enter the second act is the refusal of the call. Initially, the protagonist may resist or hesitate to accept the challenge. There is almost always an inevitable and predictable refusal of the call. This can create dramatic tension, as the audience already knows what is at stake. A momentary feeling of anxiety for the viewer adds to the rising tension and builds anticipation towards the next plot point. In Interstellar, Cooper initially refuses the course of action that he must undertake. He is apprehensive about leaving his family and doubts his ability and suitability for the assignment to which he is tasked. In Oppenheimer, J. Robert Oppenheimer is initially skeptical about entering the arms race, but the greater threat of the Nazis developing the bomb first spurs him onward at great cost to both him and his family. This notion of sacrifice will become especially relevant in the following acts. There is, however, hope at this point, as our protagonist invariably meets their mentor. This mentor figure provides guidance, advice, or tools to help them on their journey. A peripheral hero of sorts, who suddenly crosses paths with our protagonist and orients them and shows them the way ahead. In Batman, Bruce Wayne's mentor of sorts is Ra's al Ghul. Although he turns out to be a nefarious character, his purpose in the first part of the middle act of the movie is to be Bruce Wayne's ally and teacher. In Memento, Nolan plays with this notion of the mentor. Because of Leonard Shelby's cognitive disability, none of the characters, including their narrator, are actually trustworthy. This adds great tension into the movie, as we are kept guessing all the way along. In the Batman Trilogy, Inception, Interstellar and The Prestige, old reliable collaborator Michael Caine plays just such a role. He is a reassuring voice, a moral compass and motivation for a protagonist, while also providing valuable exposition and context to the story. To give credit to Nolan, the mentor characters and other peripheral characters, for example, Ariadne in Inception and Rachel Dawes in Batman, are all very well fleshed out and developed characters in and of themselves, complete with their own story arc, hopes and fears. This gives not just nuance, but a solidity and validity to Nolan's storytelling. And this is a key difference between Nolan and many other screenwriters. We then come to a point where our protagonist crosses the threshold. They make a commitment to embark on their journey and leave behind a familiar world, stepping into the unknown. We are now truly in the second act of the movie, and in the belly of the whale, as one might put it. At this point in time in the narrative, the protagonist must inevitably decide once and for all to cross the threshold and take on the adventure. If we look at a story circle, we are now in descending action, well and truly on a journey into another world. Our protagonist is in uncharted territory. In Inception, by this stage, Cobb has assembled his team and convinced them to at least begin the process of taking on the assignment at hand. In The Prestige, both Angier and Borden have resolved to outdo each other and are both obsessed with stealing and perfecting the trick of the transported man at great costs to themselves and everyone around them. The next step on the journey is often referred to as tests, allies and enemies. Along the journey, the protagonist faces obstacles, gains allies, and encounters adversaries that test their skills and resolve. In this regard, I really like the Dark Knight movie. The character of the Joker encapsulates all of these in one character, absolutely perfectly. Even though he is Batman's tormentor, he is also a sort of perverse mentor. His whole narrative timeline is spent trying to teach Batman a lesson while destroying Gotham City at the same time. Ultimately, Batman wins out because of his implacable moral compass and sense of right and wrong. The Joker then is flawed, but then he must be in order for the good guy to win. This brings us to the midpoint of the movie, a significant event or revelation that marks the halfway point of the story and often changes the direction and intensity of the conflict. The midpoint of the movie is crucially important and marks a turning point of sorts for the characters, where a revelation spurs them and emboldens them to confront the antagonist and drives the story until its climax. The midpoint in Inception is interesting, as Cobb and the team realise that they are now at a point of no return. They must press on. They realise that if they die in the dream, they will be left in limbo and a sort of coma that they cannot wake up from. The team are angry with Cobb, but also realise that this is their motivation and commit to the battle ahead. In Interstellar, Cooper and his team begin to realise just how much of a price they are going to pay in order to save humanity. They have already lost valuable lives and decades, and are now left with no choice but to give everything in order to save the day and salvage something from the whole ordeal. Next comes the dark night of the soul, a moment of doubt, despair, or crisis, where the protagonist faces their greatest challenge and must confront their inner demons or flaws. The protagonist will likely, at this point, find themselves completely lost or betrayed, or will have suffered some significant tragedy and realises that the doors have been shut behind them and the only way is forward. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bruce Wayne has gotten over the fact that he has been betrayed by Catwoman, and he has recovered from his devastating injuries at the hands of Bane. He is now ready to return to Gotham and prevent Talia al Ghul from destroying the city and finishing her father's work. Selina Kyle, or Catwoman as we know her, for her part, is meanwhile back in Gotham City and realises her mistake in betraying Bruce. She now has a second chance to be the ally that she once might have been. And here is where we break into Act 3, the transition of the second act to the third act, where the protagonist commits fully to achieving their goal and the stakes are raised. In Inception again, Cobb's team are fixed in resolving their problems. They know how they have passed the point of no return, and the only way forward is to dig deeper in order to find their way out of their predicament. An epic battle that spans multiple levels of the dream world now comes to a culmination. Each member of the team knows that Cobb has in some way betrayed them, but that the only way out is as his ally. We come then to a final confrontation, the climax of the story, where the protagonist faces off against the main antagonist or obstacle in a decisive conflict. In The Dark Knight Rises, for the final confrontation, Bruce Wayne is back in Gotham and has found his own strength and subsequently Bane's weakness. Bane, despite all his brute force strength, is actually a flawed character if you remove his mentor Talia al Ghul. Analogous to this is his breathing apparatus that, once destroyed by Batman, renders him almost useless. We then come to a moment of truth. The protagonist undergoes the transformation or realization that leads to the resolution of the conflict. Cooper awakes after being ejected from the Tesseract in Interstellar and finally reunites with his daughter, now twice his age, on her deathbed. Though cut off by time and spatial dimension, they have between them saved humanity and given new hope. His daughter Murphy urges him to return to his true calling and go out there and find Brand and start a new life through a sense of duty and love. The climactic moment, the highest point of tension or emotion in the story, often involves a dramatic showdown or revelation. In The Dark Knight, this is the scene where the Joker pits the passengers of the two ferries against one another. He miscalculates. In The Prestige, this is where Borden is sent for the drop and the mysterious Lord Coldler is revealed. In Insomnia, Al Pacino's character implores Hilary Swank's character not to lose her way at a pivotal point, which also happens to be the film's denouement. And then we have the resolution and return. The conflict is resolved and the protagonist returns to their ordinary world, but forever changed by their journey. In Interstellar, both Cooper and the world have changed, whereas in Memento, there is a perverse anticlimactic twist where the audience receives the revelation but the protagonist does not. We've been had all along. In the Batman Trilogy, there is a resolution and the world does return to its natural order, but there is always a sense of more to do, of continuation, and of another potential threat somewhere over the horizon. In The Prestige, Borden has had the chance to salvage his family and walk away from the life he once led, which was one of obsession. The characters around him have been all but obliterated, and Borden has incurred quite considerable loss despite his ultimate win. These plot points help create a compelling narrative arc and drive the story forward, providing structure and cohesion to the screenplay. The three acts structure goes all the way back to a time when the Greeks formulated dramas as means of public discourse. Aristotle's protasis, epitasis and catastrophe framed the three-act structure very well and has been a blueprint for drama from time immemorial. Shakespeare's plays follow a linear narrative that is not a far cry from the formats we are used to today by any means, and owes much to his Greek predecessors. In more recent times, Bulgarian essayist Tsvetan Todorov in 1971 proposed narratology. He posited that all narratives contain equilibrium, disequilibrium, recognition, resolution, and new equilibrium. Narrative, he argued, is a language we are conditioned to speak. As we can see from numerous examples, Nolan hits all the plot points and scene beats without fail. If he does not, the movie fails. If we read the screenplays and watch the movies to scrutinize these points closely, we begin to see that Nolan knows the rules so well that he has license to break them and is conscious of how far he can go within that remit. What we end up with then is a much richer narrative experience, and that is arguably what sets him apart. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for notifications. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.